Ingrid Carver stood at the kitchen sink at 11:15, still in the black wool dress she'd worn to Lionel's funeral, mechanically rinsing plates that someone, she couldn't remember who, had left stacked on the counter after the reception. The wake had emptied out an hour ago. Poppy was asleep upstairs, exhausted from the weight of a grief too large for a 7-year-old. The house smelled like casserole and chrysanthemums and the particular sadness of endings. She heard Roland on the stairs. His step was different, lighter somehow, not the measured, careful tread of a man in mourning but something quicker, almost eager. He came into the kitchen still loosening his tie, and when he looked at her, Ingrid felt something shift. It wasn't grief in his eyes, it was calculation. "Hayes called," he said. Alistair Hayes, Lionel's lawyer, the man who'd been handling Carver family affairs for 32 years. "He's reading the will tomorrow morning. Said he'd come to us given the circumstances." Ingrid set down the last plate. "I thought he said next week." He moved it up, something about the estate being straightforward. Roland poured himself 2 fingers of scotch from Lionel's bottle, a 25-year Glenfiddich the old man had been saving for a special occasion. Roland didn't hesitate over it. "Dad left me everything, Ingrid. The cottage in Muskoka, the investment portfolio, the downtown condo he bought in 2008, everything." She waited. There was something in the way he held his glass, proprietary and cold, that made her keep very still. $16 million, Roland said. He looked at her the way a man looks at a room he's about to renovate, assessing it, measuring it, deciding what stays and what doesn't. Ingrid thought about the last 7 years. She thought about the night Roland's architecture firm had nearly gone under, and she'd worked double shifts at the physiotherapy clinic, running on 4 hours of sleep and gas station coffee, so the mortgage wouldn't lapse. She thought about Poppy's birth, and Lionel in the waiting room, holding her hand when Roland was stuck on a conference call in Vancouver. She thought about driving Lionel to his oncology appointments in Burlington when Roland was traveling for work, about the two of them listening to Glenn Gould on the 403, and arguing cheerfully about whether the Maple Leafs would ever sort themselves out. "Roland," she said slowly, "that's wonderful. Your father wanted to take care of you." "Of us," he said, but there was a hesitation before those words, a fraction of a second too long. "Did he leave anything personal? A note or?" He always talked about his mother's brooch, the one with the garnets. Ingrid had admired it once, years ago, and Lionel had never forgotten that she had. "Hayes mentioned something." Roland swirled his glass. "Said there was an envelope in the personal safe, your name on it." She felt something settle gently in her chest. An envelope. Something written. Something from Lionel, in that careful, slightly left-leaning handwriting that had arrived on every birthday she'd had since marrying into this family. Just an envelope, Roland added, wasn't part of the estate documentation at all, separate from everything. He refilled his glass without asking if she wanted anything. Then he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Pity perhaps, but the kind with no warmth behind it. "The thing is, Ingrid," he started. He always used her full name when he'd already made up his mind. "I've been thinking about the future. About what I want it to look like." She turned to face him fully. "I'm not the same person I was last month," Roland said. "I have options now, real ones. I can build the kind of practice I always imagined, take the commissions I've been passing up because we couldn't afford the risk, travel properly." He paused. "I need to seriously consider whether we're still in alignment." "In alignment," she said. "We got together young. We've grown in different directions, I think we both know that." Her hands had gone cold. She pressed them flat against the counter. In the den she could hear the old grandfather clock that Lionel had inherited from his own father, ticking steadily. 60 years that clock had been in this family. "You're asking for a divorce," she said. 3 days after we buried your father." Roland set down his glass. "I'm being honest with you, I think that's worth something." She looked at this man she had married at 31, this man she had carried through his worst years, whose daughter she had raised with everything she had, and she understood with quiet and terrible clarity that he was already gone. He'd been gone before Lionel had. He'd just been waiting for the money to make it official. "Please go to bed," she said quietly. He went. She stood at the sink until she heard his bedroom door close, and then she let herself breathe. Alistair Hayes's office smelled like old wool and Earl Grey. He was a compact man in his late 60s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the careful manner of someone who'd spent decades knowing things he couldn't say until the right moment arrived. He'd been at Lionel and Margaret Carver's wedding. He'd helped carry the casket at Margaret's funeral 12 years ago. He stood when Ingrid came in. "Mrs. Carver, please sit." He waited until she'd settled. "Roland isn't joining us?" He sends his regards. She'd left him at home with Poppy and a list of excuses. Alistair nodded slowly. He opened the top drawer of his desk and placed on the blotter a standard legal envelope, cream-colored, not new. Her name was written across the front in Lionel's handwriting, precise, slightly left-leaning, the penmanship of a man who'd learned it from the Brothers of the Sacred Heart in Sudbury in 1962. For Ingrid. Private. He brought this to me 14 months ago, Alistair said quietly, right after his first round of treatment. He was very clear. It was not to appear in the estate documents. It was not to be mentioned at the formal reading. He wanted you to have it privately on your own, and he wanted Roland to know nothing about it until you decided otherwise. He knew, Ingrid said. It wasn't a question. Alistair's expression answered her. He said, Alistair, my boy is about to make a choice. When he makes it, make sure Ingrid is taken care of. She picked up the envelope. It was heavier than she expected. Alistair moved to the window, giving her his back. Alone, she sat with Lionel's handwriting under her fingers for a long moment before she opened it. Inside was a letter, written by hand, and beneath it, a bank card plain and blue with her full name embossed in raised letters across the bottom. She unfolded the letter. Dear Ingrid, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Alistair gave this to you the way I asked, which means Roland did what I was afraid he'd do. I want to say first, I'm sorry. I'm sorry my son turned into someone I didn't raise him to be. I watched it happen slowly, the impatience, the way he stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as a convenience. I hoped I was wrong. Fathers usually hope that. But I know my son and I know you, so I made other plans. 7 years ago, I opened an account in your name alone. I've been funding it from investments Roland has never known about. A commercial property in Oak purchased in my name, a separate portfolio I managed quietly for years. The money is legally and completely yours. Roland has no claim to it. It was always a gift from me to you, properly documented, all taxes handled. The current balance is $21 million. She put the letter down. She picked it up, read the number again, put it down again. $21 million, $5 million more than Roland had received. Her hands were shaking badly enough that she pressed them flat against her thighs and breathed through her nose. The way she told her patients to breathe. When something hurt too much to look at all at once. She read the rest. You have earned every cent of this. You drove me to Burlington 47 times in the last 2 years. I counted. You held my hand through the bad days and made me laugh on the worse ones. You raised Poppy with a steadiness I don't think Roland ever stopped long enough to notice. You kept this family together when he couldn't be bothered, and you did it without complaint and without recognition. This money is yours, but please, be smart. Don't tell Roland yet. Get yourself in order first, protect Poppy, find a good lawyer. Then when you're ready and safe, you can decide what to do with the information. I've left instructions with Alistair. He has names, trust him. You are stronger than you know, and you have been the best daughter I never had. With all my love, Lionel. She was crying before she reached the last line, not the careful, composed grief she'd been managing for 4 days, but something older and rawer. The cry of someone who hadn't been truly seen in a very long time and was suddenly, overwhelmingly seen. A soft knock. Alistair opened the door a few inches. When he took in her face, he came in and sat quietly across from her. He told me to say one more thing. When the time came, he paused. He said, tell her she was always the real Carver. Ingrid laughed through her tears. It was so exactly like Lionel that it hurt. There's a video message, Alistair said. He recorded it here in this office. Would you like to see it? She nodded. He turned his laptop toward her. Lionel appeared on screen, thinner than she remembered from even 6 months ago, but with that brightness in his eyes that had never dimmed. He sat in this very chair, in this very office, and looked directly at the camera the way he looked at people when he needed them to understand he meant every word. Hello, sweetheart. She pressed her fingers over her mouth. If you're watching this, then we're past the hardest part for me. The hard part for you is probably just beginning, and I'm sorry I can't be there for it. He leaned forward. I want to be clear about one thing. The money isn't pity. I didn't leave you more than Roland to punish him, or because I loved you more than my own son. I gave Roland what I gave him because I needed to know what he'd do with it. Money is the most honest test there is. It shows you what someone actually values underneath all the things they say about themselves. He paused. I prayed I was wrong about him. I've never wanted to be wrong about anything more in my life. He sat back. Use the money the way you use everything else, Ingrid, wisely, generously. For Poppy, for the work you love, and be free. You have earned the right to be free. The video ended. Outside Alistair's window on King Street, she could hear the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday morning in Toronto, a streetcar, voices, someone's Tim Hortons cup skittering across pavement in the November wind. Ingrid straightened in her chair. She folded the letter and tucked it into her coat pocket against her chest. She picked up the bank card. "Alistair," she said, "I'm going to need that lawyer's name." Roland had already begun remaking the house by the time she got home. The furniture wasn't gone yet, but there were printouts on the kitchen table, photographs of mid-century modern pieces, all clean angles and cold materials. The framed photos from the hallway, Poppy's school pictures, Lionel and Margaret's wedding portrait, Ingrid's grandmother's watercolor of Georgian Bay, were stacked face down on the bench by the door. Roland was in the study on the phone, his voice performing confidence for someone he wanted to impress. She stopped in the hallway and listened. "By spring," he was saying. "I'm thinking Rosedale actually, something with a proper home office." A pause. That laugh, the one she'd never heard before this week. "Yes, well, things are different now." She walked to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and looked out at the back garden. Lionel had planted those lilac bushes along the fence. He and Ingrid had done it together the spring before Poppy was born, arguing about spacing while Roland was away for a project reveal in Vancouver. Roland came into the kitchen. He stopped when he saw her expression. "I'm not trying to hurt you," he said, with the exhausted air of someone who'd rehearsed this already. "I'm trying to be honest." "You've contacted a realtor," she said. "I'm exploring options." He crossed his arms. "This doesn't have to be ugly, Ingrid. You have the clinic, you have your income, you'll be fine." "And Portia?" She'd seen the name in a notification on his phone 3 days ago, photographed the screen and said nothing until now. The pause was its own answer. "Portia is a colleague," Roland said. Of course, the kettle boiled. She poured her tea. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours by end of the week." "Ingrid, you can't afford." "I've found a way." She looked at him steadily, and something in her expression, some quality of stillness she hadn't had a week ago, made him go quiet. "I'd like you to stay at the downtown condo for the next little while. Poppy needs stability right now. She doesn't need to watch us argue over furniture." "This is my house," Roland said, but with less certainty than she expected. "It was Lionel's house," she corrected quietly, "and Lionel believed in treating people with dignity." She picked up her mug and walked to the door. "You can take the Glenfiddich, he would have wanted that." Sylvana Nash had an office on Adelaide Street and the focused energy of someone who treated every problem as already in the process of being solved. 44 years old, impeccably organized, recommended by Alistair Hayes without hesitation. "Everything," she said when Ingrid sat down, "don't soften it." So Ingrid told her. Roland's behavior since the will reading, Portia's name on his phone, the printouts of furniture the realtor calls, the way Roland had stacked Poppy's school photos face down without a second thought. Sylvana took notes without interrupting. When Ingrid finished, she put down her pen. "Roland believes he's operating from a position of financial strength. He doesn't know about Lionel's gift to you. That's our most significant advantage, and we don't touch it until the moment it will do the most good." She tapped the desk. "We file for divorce on grounds of adultery. We document his absence from Poppy's daily life. We request full physical custody and freeze joint assets pending proper assessment." "He's threatened to go for full custody himself," Ingrid said. "Let him." Sylvana's voice was level and final. "You are the primary caregiver of record. You're the one at every school pickup, every dental appointment, every Saturday morning hockey practice. You're a registered healthcare professional with stable income and an established home. Roland has been absent for 6 weeks and is actively planning to relocate." She closed her folder. "When the time comes, we disclose the full scope of Lionel's gift. Roland will understand he's been playing a game he already lost before it started." The Lakeshore General Hospital Foundation Gala was held on the first Saturday of December. Ingrid had been on the foundation board for 4 years. She'd sold tables, organized the silent auction, and 2 years ago given a speech about the new physiotherapy wing for which she'd helped raise nearly $140,000. Roland was attending. She'd learned this from the foundation's communications director, who called to ask, delicately, whether they'd be sitting together or separately, that Roland had purchased 2 tickets at the last minute, in his own name. Ingrid called her friend Mabel Fournier. "I need a favor," she said. "Name it," said Mabel, who'd driven 3 hours from Barrie the week of Lionel's funeral to drop off groceries without being asked. "Come to the gala with me." A pause. "He's bringing her?" "I believe so." "What color do you want me in?" "I have a green dress that's going to make me look like I've already won." Ingrid laughed for the first time in 2 weeks. She bought a dress the color of deep water, dark teal, simple with a severity that suited the room. She wore the garnet earrings Alistair had found in Lionel's safe alongside the envelope, small gold settings modest exactly right. They arrived at the Carlu before Roland did. The foundation chair, Dr. Eugenia Mwamba, spotted Ingrid at the door and crossed the room immediately. Ingrid, we've been thinking of you constantly. Lionel was such a champion of this gala. We're naming the new rehabilitation suite after him. I should have called first, but we agreed unanimously. That would have made him mortified, Ingrid said, and completely delighted. Thank you, Eugenia. She worked the room the way she always had, not performing, just present, asking about people's families, listening to stories about Lionel from donors who'd known him for 30 years. She didn't look for Roland, she didn't need to. She felt him arrive. There's a particular shift in a room's attention when someone enters performing a version of themselves. Roland wore a new suit and had his hair cut differently. Portia Weld was beside him in silver, laughing at something, her hand at his elbow in a way that suggested she'd been practicing it. He saw Ingrid at the same moment she turned. His face moved through several things quickly. She recognized the sequence from her clinic, patients who came in expecting easy and found difficult. He crossed the room. What are you doing here, low and tight? I'm on the board, Roland, 4 years now. She said it simply. You came to one of these, I think, 2019? Portia had drifted after him and now stood at his shoulder, with an expression calibrated between gracious and territorial. Hello, Ingrid said to her pleasantly. Ingrid Carver, Lionel's daughter-in-law. I know who you are, Portia said. I'm sure you do, Ingrid smiled. Dr. Mwamba was just telling me they're naming the rehabilitation suite after Lionel. Lovely, isn't it? She watched Roland register that Dr. Mwamba was now approaching from the far end of the room, and watched him understand, in that moment, that the woman he'd been rearranging his house to be rid of was in this room, someone people were moving toward. Ingrid. Dr. Mwamba arrived and slipped a warm hand through Ingrid's arm. Come, I want to introduce you to the new chief of cardiology. He actually met Lionel at the Heart and Stroke Gala 3 years ago. She glanced at Roland with courteous neutrality. Lovely of you to come, Mr. Carver. She drew Ingrid away. Mabel appeared at Ingrid's other side like a well-timed escort. His jaw, Mabel murmured, is still on the floor. Good, Ingrid said quietly, let it stay there. She went to the washroom during the break between dinner and the auction. Portia followed 2 minutes later. They stood at adjacent sinks and regarded each other in the mirror. He told me you were bitter, Portia said. Difficult. Ingrid dried her hands. He tells a good story. He said the marriage was over long before. She stopped. Ingrid turned to face her, not with anger, but with the directness she used with patience when the truth was uncomfortable but necessary. Portia, I'm going to say something, and you can do with it what you think is right. Roland is a man who measures the world by what it offers him in any given moment. Right now you fit the life he's imagining for himself. Think carefully about whether you want to be someone else's arrival story. She paused at the door. Also, Lionel left me more than he left Roland, significantly more. You might want to factor that in, since you're clearly factoring things. She left before Portia could find an answer. The custody hearing was on a Friday in February. The courtroom was cold the way Toronto courtrooms are cold in winter, efficiently, impartially, without interest in what's at stake. Ingrid sat beside Silvana. Across the aisle Roland sat with his lawyer, a man who wore his confidence like cologne. Portia was not there. The witnesses Silvana had assembled were Poppy's teacher Miss Okonkwo, testified that Ingrid had not missed a single school event in the 6 weeks since Lionel's death and had personally organized the class's fall nature walk. The clinic's office manager produced scheduling records showing Ingrid had restructured her entire caseload to be home for school pickup without exception. The neighbor to the left testified to Ingrid's car in the driveway every weeknight, and Dr. Mwamba spoke about 4 years of consistent, generous, reliable presence on the foundation board, with the careful precision of someone accustomed to public accounting. Roland's lawyer argued finances. He argued that $16 million represented capacity. Justice Beatrice Olawale looked at him over her glasses with an expression Ingrid recognized from her senior colleagues at the clinic. The expression of someone who has seen this presentation many times and is already past the part where it's persuasive. Counsel, Justice Olawale said, this court is not determining whose bank account is larger. It is determining what serves this child's best interests. Please address that. Roland's lawyer moved to his witness. Except Portia Weld had not provided the testimony Roland expected. Instead, she had submitted a sworn statement about a series of text messages in which Roland had asked her to describe Ingrid as erratic and unreliable to mutual acquaintances. She included the screenshots. She signed the statement herself. Roland went very still when that document was entered into evidence. Silvana stood. She was brief, organized, and final. Your Honor, the pattern here is consistent and clear. Mrs. Carver has been the primary caregiver for Poppy Carver since Poppy's birth. Mr. Carver has been increasingly absent since October, has made no provision for Poppy's schooling in his relocation plans, and has actively attempted to manufacture testimony against his wife. Miss Carver, meanwhile, has continued working, parenting, and building a stable future for her daughter. She set down her folder. She has always been capable of standing on her own. This court need only recognize what this child's daily life has already demonstrated. Justice Olawale reviewed the documents. The courtroom was very quiet. Mr. Carver, the judge said finally, and Roland straightened. I'm troubled not by your finances but by your choices. You have had 6 weeks to demonstrate that you intend to remain a consistent presence in your daughter's life. Instead, I have evidence of relocation planning, social manipulation, and a sustained pattern of absence. That is not the record of a parent who has earned equal standing in this matter. She looked at Ingrid. Mrs. Carver, I'm granting you full physical custody of Poppy. Mr. Carver will have structured visits on alternate weekends supervised by a family coordinator for an initial period of 3 months pending a co-parenting assessment. She looked back at Roland. I want to be clear, Mr. Carver. This court's patience for further attempts to undermine Mrs. Carver's stability or credibility is finished. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Roland said quietly. The gavel, the scrape of chairs. Mabel was at Ingrid's side before she'd fully stood. Silvana snapped her briefcase closed with the satisfaction of someone who'd known the outcome before the opening arguments. He'll settle on the financial division by month's end, she said, low and certain. Give him 3 weeks. Across the courtroom, Roland sat alone at his table. His lawyer was already packing up, professionally indifferent to the result. Roland looked at Ingrid with an expression she couldn't quite name. Something that might have been grief, or the beginning of understanding that grief was precisely what he'd earned. She didn't go to him. She had nothing to say that the morning hadn't already said more clearly than she could. She went out into the February cold with Mabel's arm through hers, to pick up her daughter from school. 8 months later, Ingrid expanded the clinic into the space next door, a second treatment room, proper reception area, a small group rehabilitation room. She ran Tuesday and Thursday afternoons for post-surgical patients who couldn't afford regular individual care. She named the group program the Lionel Carver Community Rehabilitation Sessions. It was exactly what he would have told her was completely unnecessary. And then cried about when he thought she wasn't looking. Poppy, 8 now, had discovered she could draw. Filling sketchbook after sketchbook with careful, observational pictures of the backyard in different seasons, the clinic's orange waiting chairs, Mabel's considerable hair. She spent alternate weekends with Roland. The visits had improved since the court-ordered sessions, slowly, unevenly, the way real things improve when there's no other option. Roland had not become a different person, but he had, Ingrid thought, become more honest about which person he actually was. That was something, not everything, but for Poppy's sake it was enough to work with. On a Tuesday evening in late September, after her last patient had left and the clinic was quiet, Ingrid sat in her office with a cup of tea and looked at the number on her phone. It had grown since February. Thomas Obi, the financial advisor Alistair had recommended, was careful and principled and had understood immediately, without being told in so many words, that this was money meant to be used rather than kept. A portion had seeded a health equity fund she'd set up with Dr. Mwamba through the hospital foundation. Another portion sat in trust for Poppy's education. The rest was invested in ways Thomas managed and Ingrid was slowly learning to understand. The number itself no longer made her feel powerful. It had stopped doing that around month 3, when she realized the feeling she'd been waiting for, safety, freedom, the absence of needing to ask permission for her own life, had actually arrived months before the money had. It had arrived the morning she sat in Alistair Hayes's quiet office and read Lionel's handwriting and understood, with the kind of clarity that lands like cold water, that she had always been worth more than Roland had bothered to tell her. The money was proof of that, but it wasn't the source. She set down her phone and looked out at Dundas Street in the last of the September light, the Portuguese bakery across the road, an older man walking a very large undisciplined dog, 2 kids on bikes cutting through the crosswalk at exactly the wrong moment, the way kids always have and always will. She thought about what Lionel had said in his video, in his careful left-leaning voice. looking straight at a camera in a small office on King Street, because he'd known she'd need to hear it. Be free. You've earned it. She had. And it turned out that being free felt less like winning and more like breathing, like the particular quality of air after a long Ontario winter, when you walk outside one morning and everything smells like cold water and soil and the unhesitating certainty that something is about to grow.